you everyone for being here with me today. As Danny mentioned, I will be teaching one of the modules in the Masters of Travel Journalism. The name of the module itself is Tourism and Travel Journalism, which says everything and nothing at the same time. But what we'll be reviewing in this module is basically how the traditional media is looking and evolving nowadays. Before we get into it, and I'll try to keep it short because I don't want to be talking about me for a while, but my name is Marck Guttman. I often sign my articles as Marck Gut, so if you Google that, you'll see me. On my social media channels, you can find me as Don Viajes, and that translates from Spanish as like Mr. Travels. So there you go. A bit about myself. So I have been doing this for about 16 years now. I've worked on staff for a couple of different travel magazines. I have freelanced for over 30 titles internationally. Anything you can think of, from National Geographic and Travel and Leisure to Vanity Fair and Esquire, including some in-flight magazines and some newspapers. My stories have been recognized by some tourism offices like Destination Canada. I got a beautiful recognition, the Explore Canada Award of Excellence, for a story I published on camping in the Canadian Arctic, and also Amigo de Costa Rica by the ITC, which is the Costa Rican Tourism Board. Most of my work has to do with conservation, both environmental and cultural. I love languages. I love diversity in its many forms and ways. And though I cannot always, or I do not always 100% commit to it because I think it's part of human condition, I want to think that I am a critical voice and that I prioritize quality over immediacy, which is something that it's not commonly happening nowadays with how fast we consume content. I love mountains, as you can tell. I'm actually right now in Mexico City visiting family. What you can see in the background is Peyto Lake, which is in Banff, in Alberta, in Western Canada. And I'll start with the open door session. So in case you want to see some more of my work so that I don't have to be talking about me, you can check my online portfolio. You can see whom I have worked for, some of my publications. Some are in Spanish, some are in English. You can see also some of my images. And if you want to check out my Instagram, which, by the way, it is not like the most up-to-date, but you'll see some of the things that I do. Now, that being said, I'll start by showing you a photo of a beach. And I will ask you to please do whatever it is that you feel works best for you, to focus and think in detail of the story that I'm going to be sharing with you in a couple of minutes. It's a short story. It's a travel chronicle that talks about a beautiful destination. Now, what I did, and this is on purpose, I took away from this piece every single reference that would clearly let you know which place is it that I'm talking about. So what I want you to do is to close your eyes if that helps, or do whatever it is that you have to do, and then listen carefully to this story, because when I'm done, I want us to have a brief conversation on the place that you think that I'm talking about and why is that. So with no more, I'll start, okay? A day in paradise. It's just after sunrise, and the first signs of life appear along the pristine, postcard-perfect beach. Fishermen, their boats ready, leave the shore looking for a day's catch. A couple of locals, maybe 6 or 7, walk the shoreline calling out greetings that ripple like the waves. The air is thick with salt, and the sand, warm even this early, feels impossibly fine underfoot. A few visitors, still rubbing sleep from their eyes, walk toward the water's edge. Some take photos, others just stare, as though unsure where to begin. I follow the tide line, where fragments of shells crunch softly with every step. A pale gold that seems to stretch endlessly greets me good morning. A small beachside cafe serves strong, dark coffee in ceramic cups, alongside plates of fresh fruit, homemade granola, and local honey. The man behind the counter, wearing a faded shirt and a smile just as worn, insists I try their jam. I spread a bit on the bread, and it's sweet, creamy, and almost floral, a flavor that stays with me long after the last bite. By mid-morning, the sun climbs higher, and the beach begins to fill. Local families set up under trees, their laughter competing with the crash of the waves. Children splash in the shallow waters while their parents barter for breeze to complement their noon reading session. I enjoy the distant company and the long-awaited solitude. Together, yet on our own, we get to enjoy the sounds of nature. A few steps beyond the shoreline, the water shifts to a deeper blue. You should try snorkeling, says a local wearing a mask. Beneath the surface, the world changes. Maybe there's dolphins in there, or schools of silvery fish dancing in unison, or maybe sea turtles unbothered by our presence. I don't know. While tenting, the sun keeps my feet in the surface, skin warm and heart full. As the afternoon heat peaks, the pace slows. What looks like a hammock strung between two trees becomes the perfect spot to close my eyes and let my other senses do their thing. The rolling of the waves, the sweet salty smell, the laughter of older men playing cards under a makeshift shade. There's a shared stillness, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. This isn't just a beach, it's paradise. Sunset gifts us with the most spectacular natural show. Later, when the heat begins to wane, I get ready for a feast. A short walk leads me to a small village. Some walk barefoot, some sing songs. Joy is in the air. Here, simple pleasures are the most coveted. It smells like heaven, or maybe I'm just too hungry. I let my nose follow the rich aromatic traces. There's spices, vegetables, and some sort of protein. When I find the place, no words are needed. We nod, we smile, and I'm handed the most delicious local meal. Back on the beach, the reflection of the moon on the sea seems like a serenade. A group of locals gather near a fire pit, preparing for a night's bonfire. Someone strums a guitar while the rest sing in harmony, joined by the sea. Some lanterns sway from the trees, their golden light also reflecting on the water. A local man pours a drink into chipped glasses. The night's improvised music begins with a steady rhythm, growing louder and livelier as more people join in. Visitors, locals, and strangers form a circle, clapping, dancing, and laughing under a sky filled with stars. When I finally make my way back to my room, the sounds of life linger in the air. The waves still lap at the shore, steady as a heartbeat. This place doesn't just welcome you, it stays with you. So, what I would love for you to do with me as part of this exercise, if you don't mind turning on your mic and maybe your cams, is to tell me what destination you think that I'm talking about. Where is this pristine, idyllic beach that I shared a chronicle with you? Anyone feels comfortable sharing? Someone out there that thinks that might have a glimpse of where is it that this beautiful beach is?
Spain?
Okay, we have Agatha thinking of Spain. Any particular place in Spain that you can think of?
No, I only been in Barcelona, which
Okay, and for you, it sounded like a place that could be Barcelona or close to Barcelona. Um, Thank you for sharing that, Agatha. Someone else that wants to share where do they think this place is? Christina?
It feels maybe that's maybe somewhere in the Caribbean.
Okay, we have Christina thinking of a Caribbean island. Any particular
I
place in the
guess
Caribbean that you can think of?
I'm not 100% sure, no.
Okay. Anyone else that wants to share where do they think this beautiful idyllic beach is?
Something in Caribbean, maybe Barbados?
Okay, we have I think Kathy sharing that also the Caribbean, Barbados. Um, Someone else, last maybe 10 seconds before we get into the deeper part of the exercise? No.
Of
Okay, so
Colombia, Mark?
okay, Danny. So we have Danny thinking that it might be Colombia. And any specific place in Colombia that you're thinking? A Caribbean island, the Pacific in Colombia?
North of Colombia in La Guajira.
Okay, La Guajira by Venezuela, beautiful desert. Okay, well, um, I'll start by thanking all of you for sharing your thoughts on where do you think this place is. And now it's my turn to tell you that this place is nowhere and everywhere at the same time. This is not a story that I
I
found
thought
somewhere.
it's AI, eh? The photo
It,
is AI.
the photo is AI, but also the story is AI. And it's not only AI, it is a story that I particularly asked an AI platform to design so that it could be any
I, you
given.
know, I imagine that because this photo is AI, but I thought, Sardinia, something like that. But when I see the photo, I say this is AI.
Okay, I'm happy to hear, Kathy, that you actually got that. Now, my idea was to put like an actual photo of a beach that I took, just any random place. But even if the photo hadn't been there, the story was designed purposely so that it could resemble any place that has maybe a beautiful beach with some sort of like inviting weather. Now, a story like this could not have happened 15 years ago, even 10 years ago, and definitely not 20 or 30 years ago. And the reason for which this couldn't have happened, of course, has to do with AI, but it has to do with way more than AI. It has to do with how we understand and practice journalism, because the way in which we understand and practice journalism has changed drastically. It has to do, of course, with technology itself. It's not a story that could have been produced by asking a platform with AI to design a story that could fit at the same time Barbados, but also a Greek isle, but also the Guajira in Colombia, but also a beach in one of the Thai islands, but also Holbox in the Mexican Caribbean, right? And I wanted to do this exercise because when talking about traditional media and the way in which things work nowadays with travel journalism, I think it is very important that we talk about the media landscape. If we want to be a part of the media landscape, if we want to proactively engage with the industry, we have to understand how things are. Um, I'll just share a brief story. This one, I promise it's real. This is not something that I got from AI. I have been doing this for 16, a little bit over 16 years now. And it happens to me often when I'm traveling and I end up sharing some time with a group of people and they ask why is it that I'm there, and I share that I'm producing a story for one magazine, and I don't want to share a specific name, but say one of these well-known titles. Um, and this happened to me just last week as I was traveling, and someone asked me, "Oh, so you have like the best job in the world, right? So basically, a magazine is paying you and it's sending you to all these places to do all these things so that you can produce a story." Um, and the reality is, yeah, this is part of my job, and I get to travel as part of my job, and I get to produce stories that I think are worth sharing. But I think it's been a while since we last understood journalism overall like this. And I want to be super careful when I say this because there's still some media in the world where the editorial guidelines adhere more to traditional journalism, as in we won't take any invitations. We actually have a full team on staff and budget to actually pay our reporters and journalists, either freelance or on staff, to go places to produce these stories. But the reality is most of those media either are not around or change the way in which they approach journalism. And I think it is very important for us to understand that, because if we want to be a part of this industry and we want and we dream or we want to see our names one day and share that our bylines include some of these magazines, we have to understand how the industry works, right? So to talk about the media landscape today, we have to talk about a couple of things. Well, more than a couple. The first of them being journalism itself. If we think of traditional journalism and the ethics and principle of journalism, um, thinking of objectivity, right? Like the pretensions of objectivity, if we think of the impartiality. Nowadays, most of the times when we read a story, a travel story, and I'm talking about soft news, more specifically travel. By no means I'm suggesting that this is the way it works, though it's also shifting when it comes to hard news. But when it comes to travel within the editorial world and the content production ecosystem, most of the times when we see a story somewhere, there was a stakeholder involved in there. What do I mean by a stakeholder? Either a tourism office, it can be a national tourism office, it can be a regional tourism office, it can be chamber of commerce, it can be a hotel association, it can be a specific hotel or a specific travel agency that actually works with us journalists. And again, it doesn't matter if we're talking about staff journalists or freelance journalists to make those trips happen. Why? Because as we know, and I think that we don't have to have been in this industry for long, just by following the news, we see that most of the times traditional newspapers, traditional newsrooms, traditional magazines have less and less and less people working with them. They have to produce more content than ever, but they have less people than ever to actually produce the content. So if we think about the traditional definition of journalism, it'd be almost impossible to think, right, of I have been invited to go to a place to produce a story on that place. And most of the times in these kind of invitations, when we're working with a tourism office, with a hotel, with a travel agency, there's still, of course, 100% freedom for us to write the story that we want, to do whatever we want, right? So, and the tourism industry is so benevolent in that way that for the most part, it's beautiful stories, right? I'm not sure what has to happen. I mean, I can think of some potential scenarios, but I'm not sure what has to happen for someone to go somewhere where they want to go to experience a hike, a national park, a traditional feast, and it doesn't matter if it's a 3 Michelin star restaurant or a local food stand, street stand, but most of the times that's great experiences, right? So it's not hard for someone to write about those beautiful experiences. Yet, if you think about traditional journalism, that's kind of like a no, right? You cannot go to a place being hosted by the entity that actually has something at play. And again, nowadays, that's the way it works with most of the newspapers, with most of the magazines, with most of the media websites, right? When we read a story, it means that very likely a partner was involved in making that trip happen. Most of the times, parties that actually do have something to win or to lose on the result, on the outcome of the story. So that's the first one, and I think it's really important for us to be aware of that, because again, still nowadays, when you share with someone that you're writing a story for a magazine, a newspaper, you often hear from people that they think that the magazine is actually sending us journalists to these places, right? One more thing that we have to talk about is technology. And I think that the story that we just read and shared guesses of where the place could have potentially be talks a lot about a quickly evolving technology ecosystem, right? I can say that I'm happy to share that most of the magazines and the newspapers that I work with have a more conservative approach towards AI. That does not mean that they have declared war to AI, but what we read on those pages, what we read on those websites, still nowadays tends to be man-made, right? Like there's someone, a person behind each of the stories. Now, that does not mean that technology is coming, and we do now see stories that have been written by technology. In the best case scenario, with a disclaimer that let us know as consumers that what we're reading has been produced with AI, but also in some scenarios without even knowing, right? So it comes to us, and I'm happy to hear that Kathy saw that the photo of the beach was, or seemed to her like it was generated by AI. Now, I think AI is a topic in itself, and we could be spending one entire module and maybe one entire master's just talking about AI, how it is evolving, its potential and its risks. But it's not just AI that we're talking about. Even when it comes to producing audiovisuals for, say, a major TV station. I remember when I first started doing this, like 16 years ago, sometimes I traveled with TV crew, and even though it was not most of the times, precisely because, sorry, the time required for TV production was very particular, so it was not very convenient to have a group with 3 or 4 journalists and a TV crew. But you'd see them, and it'd be maybe small groups of about like 3 to 4 people. So you'd have a cameraman, you'd have the presenter, and then you'd have someone there maybe with a script or assisting with production. And I haven't seen that in a while. Again, it doesn't mean that it's not happening, but what couldn't happen 20 years ago, you could not potentially have one single person, or maybe you could, but it was definitely not common, producing a whole TV show. Now it's very common. Now we do have the technology to do that. While in my case, also being a photographer, I can share like I never got to actually publish photos that were taken on a dark room, so on an analog camera and then developed on a dark room. Sorry, but I do remember that even the transfer of photography are required different times. And now, without even having a camera, you can actually, with your camera in your phone, you can actually have a potential magazine cover. So the way in which technology is shaping the industry is very interesting. It also gives us tons of benefits. It allows us to work more rapidly. It allows us to work with less resources, but it also makes the environment way more competitive because just like you that have your own cell phone with an incredible camera capable of doing incredible stuff and with platforms that allow us to send for free really, really heavy files, there's so many other people that have access to those things as well, right? So technology in itself is definitely something that we have to consider when analyzing the media landscape. Now, and this is something very important that I want to talk about, and I briefly shared something about it when I first started, when it comes to stakeholders. When we want to work as journalists in the tourism industry, it doesn't matter if we want to do it as freelancers or if we want to be on staff, to make these trips happen. Because I am assuming, and maybe I'm wrong, but I take it that if you're here and if you're thinking of professionally dedicating yourself to producing travel content, I want to think that you want to travel. And it might not be the case. There's some people that are great at producing travel content from their office or their home. But I think that the travel itself is something that really draws our attention, right? And in order to make these trips happen, most of the times we have to work with tons of stakeholders. Clearly, if we're thinking of getting our content on a magazine, or if we're thinking of getting our content on the small screen or the big screen, we have to think of the producers, the editors that we're working with. That's a given. I'm not even referring to them just because I take it for granted that we know that we will be working with them, but also the many people that make these trips viable. Maybe we want to go to the Antarctica, right? And maybe we have a really interesting story on how are the bird populations recovering from the bird flu that killed hundreds and thousands of birds last year. There's a really interesting story there. There's a story that has potential. Now, in order to go there, we'll have to spend a lot of money. And with nowadays standards, most of the times, if we were responsible of paying a trip to go to the Antarctica, to hop on a couple, maybe 3-4 planes to make it to Ushuaia or Puerto Natales, or maybe somewhere in the South Island of New Zealand, and then taking either one more plane, which is not commercially available all the time, or a ship that could take us to the South Georgia island, for example, we could have to pay way more money than the amount of money that we could get paid for the story. Now, maybe it is a very particular project that we're very passionate about, and we're willing to do that because we have the privilege to be able to afford that one special project. But one special project is definitely not sustainable in the long term, and it's that one special project that we're very passionate about, right? So when we are thinking of making this viable, sustainable in the long term, we're going to have to work with many different stakeholders. Which are some of these stakeholders? Again, the national tourism offices, regional tourism offices, maybe train companies, maybe airlines, maybe cruise ships, hotels, hotel associations, and PR agencies. A bunch of different PR agencies, because maybe I happen to be right now in Mexico, and I'm pretty interested in a story of the coquis, which are like tiny frogs in Puerto Rico. And I don't actually have the contact of the right person who could potentially get me to them or the researchers. But Discover Puerto Rico, which in this case would be the regional tourism office, could maybe hook me with the right people. So when we think of the travel world nowadays in terms of journalism, we have to be aware that we're going to be working with a lot of people. And to make it viable again, it is super important to think of the editorial standards. It is super important to think of the ethics of journalism, but it's also super important to think of partnerships with these stakeholders to make the trips viable, right? Now, the next big thing, and I already mentioned a little bit about this, is monetization. In order to make a living out of being a travel reporter or a travel writer or a travel journalist, we have to earn money, right? We have to pay the rent, we have responsibilities. Now, there's of course the traditional path of looking for a job at a magazine, a radio station, a TV station. Now, the reality is nowadays, and luckily, yes, print is not dead. I am a big fan and hashtag print is not dead. We see new magazines coming up. There's new beautiful projects that actually care about storytelling. We're seeing different magazines. I invite you to take a look. If you don't know them, there's a beautiful, I think it's Korean magazine called Serial. There's a beautiful new travel magazine called Ori, which is, I think, a quarterly. There's YOLO journals. So there's a bunch of different magazines that have been created long after the print is dead movement. But the reality is there's less magazines and less newspapers that there used to be. I'm not talking, of course, about websites. That's different. We can all create a blog. The thing is, how do we make that profitable? That's a different story because it is definitely a possibility. But when talking about traditional media, the big teams that we used to see 15, 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago with newsrooms and magazines are no longer there. Even nowadays, if we follow the news, we see that even solid, robust newspapers and magazines are still shrinking in terms of the amount of people working with them. So this is by no means me trying to disencourage you from getting a job at a magazine or a newspaper if that's what you want. But we do have to be aware that those positions are less and less with time. And if we want to aim for the possibility of making a living as a freelance journalist, we have to think of alternate ways of monetizing what we do. Why? Because there's just so many stories that one can produce. There's just so many trips that one can take. Even if we are really efficient at what we do, even if we are great traveling and we don't mind going back to back on a year without going back home, even if we manage to find inspiration and time to work at 3 a.m. and produce the most beautiful story, sorry, I'm being a bit digressive here, but I remember, and I'm not sure if some of you watched like Sex and the City, but I remember when I was watching Sex and the City, and it was a common topic, the amount of cents or dollars that that they were paying for a column, right? And it was something like, I think, $1 worth, something like that. I remember different times when we used to get paid like maybe $1 or $1.50. I have a good friend of mine who's a British journalist that worked in the travel content realm for many years, but a while ago. And at some point, she was getting paid close to £2 per word. Now, those things, again, I won't ever say like that doesn't exist anymore because it's a generalization, but you might be super lucky and find or get that gig. If you do and you need someone to work with you, please don't hesitate to reach out to me because I'll be more than happy to work alongside with you. But what I'm saying is that the norm is not to get paid $1.50 or £2 per word. That's not the case. It's actually far from that. And at least this is my experience and the experience that I can share from me and many colleagues in many parts of the world that have been doing this for a while, the amount of work that you can get has not decreased. Like, it's not like there's no media now where you can publish a story. That is still out there, and we might even have more outlets now because some of them are just digital. But what we definitely see shrinking is the amount of money that we get paid for these stories. So in order to make this a full-time job that we actually make a living of, we have to think of alternate ways of monetization. And there's plenty of different ways in which you can monetize what you're doing. You can produce user-generated content and sell that to, again, the tourism offices, the hotel associations, the properties, the travel agencies, right? That's one. You can work on creating your own social media channel so that eventually you can also monetize that. You name it. Maybe you're great with words, you don't want to have anything to do with audiovisuals, and your thing is X or something else. Maybe your thing is video and that's what you love the most, and your goal is to monetize YouTube. So those options exist and they are there. Now there's also potential partnerships that you can think of, because up to this point, I've talked about stakeholders within the like direct links to the tourism industry. And sometimes what we have to do in order to make a story work is work with partner with a company that maybe it is not necessarily the ship that will take us to the Antarctica, or the airline that will fly us to Australia, or the tour guide that will take us around the national parks in Costa Rica. But maybe it is a brand like Patagonia that is invested in conservation and national parks. Or maybe we're working on a story that has to do with local handcrafted distilled beverages in Mexico, and we want to know more not only about tequila and mezcal, but also about raicilla and bacanora. And in order to do that, we can potentially partner with a big spirit company. So those options are there, but we have to consider them, because with the way the media landscape is working nowadays, exclusively living as a freelance, producing stories seems unviable. Again, it is just a generalization. Luckily, that's the bad news. The good news is that there's plenty of ways in which we can monetize what we're doing, because whenever we go to a place and we work on a story, I always say that we go to a place with a lead, thinking that we're pursuing one story, and we might find that one story or not, but the best case scenario, which is often the case, is the many leads that we get back home to after having pursued the one story. Once you're in a place and once you start interviewing people and doing research in the field, you see that there's so many more stories that you can potentially do. Again, each story that you produce and that you publish, it is some money, but unless you want to be working non-stop writing more than you're traveling, you'll probably have to find another way to monetize the job. And now, and this is where it might get a bit sketchy, but I think it is very important to talk about this. The ethics that we have to consider when we're producing content. When we're traveling, first and foremost, even if we were just traveling somewhere and not being professional content creators, there's an ethical aspect that we have to consider when we're going somewhere. And even more so when we're going somewhere for work and we are being the people responsible of sharing someone else's story. It has to do, of course, with the basic of journalism and ethics. Again, considering that nowadays it's virtually impossible to make a living out of this by expecting media to actually cover out-of-pocket expenses to go somewhere and come back with a story. But I do think that there's many ways in which we can make this work without having to betray our own principles and our own ethics. I don't think that by being invited or being hosted, by a tourism office, I have ever sacrificed saying something that I don't believe in or saying something that I don't think is right. But we have to consider that, again, whenever we're working with different companies and different potential partners in making a trip viable, in making a project viable, we can do that. And by doing that, still remaining ethic, I think, and again, with each media is different. There's some magazines and newspapers. Again, these are, at least now, if you were to ask me now, I can count those with my hands. Of course, I don't know, and I'm not aware of every single newspaper or magazine there is in the world that won't publish content that is a result of a media hosted trip. But some magazines will actually include a disclaimer, right? Saying that the travel writer or the reporter went to a place invited or hosted by, and then the name of the company. For some of these outlets, they will accept and agree to having you traveling to a place hosted by a tourism office, but maybe not agree to being hosted by a hotel or a travel agency. And there's some media that, for example, won't even do it. Now, I think it is important to include those disclaimers. I do it in my own personal blog, and I try to include it whenever I'm publishing something in a story that I'm publishing in either a newspaper, a magazine, a media website, right? And then the part that has to do with technology, but also the way in which we represent a place. I think it's a very interesting exercise to ask an AI platform to create a travel chronicle that could potentially be of anywhere and everywhere at the same time. But I don't think that we want to read that on a newspaper, right? Or on a magazine. And truth is, even without AI, we could potentially write that. And I think we see that more often than not. I'm not sure whom is it to blame. I'm not sure if it has to do with the amount of content that magazines or especially digital media are expected to produce. But if you think of maybe some of the last, especially like short stories that you read, maybe if you were on a plane and the plane still had an in-flight magazine and you were reading it, or even if you were seeing like, and this happens often with tourism companies themselves when they produce content. And we all want to talk about how unique our place is and the many authentic experiences that you will have. And sometimes, rather than going to the common phrases and, place like nowhere and an authentic experience and a unique, memorable adventure that will stay with you for the rest of your days, we might want to think of the space that we have available because it is limited. Even if we're talking about a website that could potentially, run unlimited stories, the amount of stories that we as humans can produce. And when it comes to physical media, like a newspaper, a magazine, the amount of time that a TV station has, that a radio station has is limited. So maybe instead of repeating the same things that we often read and hear about places, I think there's nothing unique about a unique experience nowadays. And I think that if there's something unique about an experience, if there's something unique about the destination, we might want to talk about that unique thing rather than just write or say it is unique, right? Because we are representing places. I want to think that we don't want to be, even if it was handwritten by us, we don't want to be the ones talking about one place that could easily become a fill in the blank story, where we just change Madeira for Barcelona or Barcelona for Acapulco or Acapulco for Mar del Plata, and they are all beautiful places by the beach. So that part is very important. And the other one, which again, and this is probably the one that it is more close to me. It has way more to do with my line of work and what I have been doing, if not for the past 16 years, at least for the past 8 or 10. That has to do with the responsibility that we have as travel content creators. If you are in Europe or if you're not in Europe, but you were following up what was happening, I think this last summer in Spain, particularly, served as an example of something that is happening more and more, not only in Spain, but in many places in the world where visitors and tourists are not being as well received as they were before, if they were at some point. And that has to do with the fact that no one wants to see themselves having to leave their cities because tourism either gentrified the place, displaced the local community, ended with a culinary tradition so that we could go to one of these beautiful cafes that look like an IKEA catalog that could be in any of the many places that you thought of and I thought of when reading the story. So I think the ethical part of traveling, but not only traveling, especially producing content and inspiring, hopefully inspiring and inviting people to go places, has a big responsibility to it. Now, I also know that for the most part, no one wants to be, neither in a Zoom nor a physical class nor anywhere with someone lecturing them. But I do think that the debate of the ethics is really important. And precisely because we're here because we want to travel and we want to be able to keep on traveling. And I want to think, and this is a question that I leave to you, if you ask me, do I want to go to a place where the local community does not want me to be there? I have to think of the details, but for the most part, unless there's a very specific reason for which I'm going, the answer is no. I don't want to be somewhere where I'm not welcomed. I think for the most part, we don't want that. And I think we have to ask ourselves, if we're not being welcome in a place, why is it? And what kind of tourism models we are in favor of and we think have more potential. Again, the ethical debate is really important, and I think we have to ask ourselves question before we decide where is it that we're going, which stakeholders are we partnering with, what are we allowing ourselves to say or not say about a place. And the fact that we have to think about that and that I invite you all to think about this does not mean that the job is impossible. It might make the job a bit more difficult, but it might also prevent us from being the ones signing an article that then is being used in a Zoom, in an open door session by someone saying, look, there's this article that talks about nowhere and everywhere at the same time, or that is inviting people to swim with dolphins in 2024, or that is, somehow responsible, sometimes indirectly, sometimes directly, for the local community to living their places because they cannot afford to live in the neighborhood where they had been living for a while. So the ethical part is very important. Now, before we say goodbye and finish with the introduction to the media landscape and the travel journalism world nowadays, I wanted to ask if you have any questions for me. This is just a tiny intro of the many things that we would be talking in depth in the module and in the Masters of Travel Journalism. Of course, we don't have the time now, nor we want to go over everything in 1 hour. But if you have any questions, if you are curious about something, if you want to ask me a question or share a thought or anything, I'd be more than happy to have you doing that and maybe have a small Q&A session or even a debate about ethics, if that's what we want. I'm all yours.
So, hi, Mark. I'm sure you can pronounce my name. So,
yeah, I was gonna say, I'm so sorry because I think names, like a very important part of recognizing someone is like asking their name. If you can help me out with your name, that'd be beautiful.
It's Sipilisiwe. You don't pronounce the H.
Okay, Sipilisiwe.
Yes, that's it.
Awesome.
So I'll
Cool.
just jump into my question. So I'm not a journalist. I was basically interested. I'm very much interested in taking up this course, though I work in the immigration field. And I do travel a lot, and I've realized I've been posting a lot on my LinkedIn and Instagram. Just basically, I've been seeing a lot of things that are happening that are not fair, and I just wanted to give room for the voices that are not heard. So that's why that would be my personal motivation why I would love to participate in this. I'm wondering, however, if this has a more of a focal point for journalists, because I do not have a journalist background. And yeah, could you answer that maybe?
I think I can. I will do my best. And then if I am not giving you enough information, please feel free to let me know. If I have it with me, I will. Otherwise, I will just ask you to leave your email with me and I will reply in depth. But I think I can. Sipilisiwe. First of all, I am really glad and happy to hear that the reason for which you're invested in getting into travel journalism has to do with the moral or ethic aspect of it. Um, I I think that the more prepared we are to do a job, the more likely we are to succeed at it, and success looks different to everyone. So it truly depends on what is it that you're looking for. Now, unlike a specialized, for example, medical field, I don't think that you need to have studied, 4 years of journalism or have a journalism degree so that you could get into this. I think in the content production ecosystem nowadays, but even before that, I think the more prepared you are, the more you know about journalism, but it might give you more tools, but it won't, be the big yes or no for you to get into it. Now, I do think that sometimes, but I don't think this is just and purely travel journalism or journalism. I think that doing things right might require more time, more efforts. It might put you in situations in which you have to deal with frustration, maybe more. But I think if you're committed to it and that's why you want to do it, there's definitely room. I remember, and I'll just share this story briefly because it has a lot to do with what you're saying. I was once invited by the National Tourism Office of Spain and the Autonomous Community of Andalusia to do it was basically a trip around some of the different cities in Andalusia. Sorry about that. Sometimes it's hard for me to remember that whenever I'm talking in English, I have to say the name of the places in English and it comes natural in Spanish. And it was about the heritage of the different more architectural styles that, of course, got to Spain and the Iberian Peninsula through the Muslim kingdoms, right? And I ended up talking about the fact that we were having conversations about if we should be calling the cathedral slash mosque in Cordoba a cathedral or a mosque. And at some point I was like, I cannot like, I'm not saying this is not an important or interesting question, but how can we be having a conversation about that when there's hundreds of people dying every day in the Mediterranean while trying to cross from Africa to Europe? It just doesn't make sense for me. And I decided that if the space that I have is this, I still think that I managed to create a beautiful story that has tons to do with inviting people to tour Andalusia and see the beautiful architecture and the mixture of cultures. But it ended up also being an invitation for people to ask, like, what is it that we're putting our efforts in? And there's room. I think there's room in the tourism industry and in the travel journalism to, through inviting stories, make people think and debate about different topics, including definitely migration. I'm not sure if that somehow answered the question. I know I went sideways, but please let me know, Sipilisiwe, and we'll take it from there. I see Ronnie, you have your hand sign up.
Thank you so much. That was very insightful and very helpful.
Awesome, Sipilisiwe. I'm happy to hear that I did answer the question. Ronnie, if you unmute yourself, I'm all yours. Ronnie, we can't hear you. You're on mute. If you are on, I'm not sure if you're on your phone, Ronnie, if you're on a computer, you should have your mic button on the bottom left side. And yeah, Danny just suggested if, okay, we can hear you now.
Okay, now my question is, I would ask that you share your email address so that you also share the number of units we are going to counter, so that if there are any changes we might suggest together with the rest, I think we'd be comfortable that way.
Yeah, definitely. I'm just about to share my email. I just did. It is on the chat. Now I will share my
I can see
screen.
that.
You can see that now? Okay, awesome. And I will share my screen once again, just because on the presentation, I have site. If you don't want to take a screenshot of the
Okay, I can.
okay, there you go.
I can do that. Okay,
Perfect.
thanks.
You're very
Thanks.
welcome.
Sure.
And yeah, I'm by the way, Ronnie, and I'm more than happy to listen to suggestions. Of course, I have already worked on like the general aspects of the course, but what I would love the most is to have people who are interested and also covering the aspects that you're more interested in. So we will definitely have space and time for us to work on certain specific things that might not be in the general or overall course, but we can definitely work with.
I'm grateful. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay.
Anyone else? All sort of like comments, questions, feedback is welcome. No one? Well, I'll start saying goodbye. If in the meantime someone else feels like they want to share a question, a comment, feedback, concerns, please feel free to do so. Otherwise, I want to thank you all for coming. I'm not sure exactly where you are nor what time is it, but I appreciate you spending some of your time to listen to me, to show interest in the travel journalism master's degree. And I look forward to hopefully seeing you in class and staying in touch. So thank you so much for everything. Have a good day or a good night, and we'll stay in touch. Bye bye. Thank you all.